As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer.
We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One. Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the Page One podcast.
Yes, welcome back, or hello for the first time. Thanks
but
for...
no welcome if you're new.
Well, no, let's welcome them as well.
Okay, fine.
We like to be welcoming to everyone, at least until the subscriber numbers go up a little bit. Thanks for taking the time to download the Page One podcast. If this is your first time listening to the Page One podcast, what we like to do here is speak to writers of all kinds, whether it's authors, screenwriters, comics writers, video game writers, or any kind of writer, and find out how they broke into the industry, what their writing process is, talk to them about their love of writing and their work.
Yeah.
Both myself and Tarek are keen writers, and the idea behind it is that we want to speak to some of the writers that we admire the most to find out really what makes them tick and how they broke in. And what we've found is that there's a real variation in all of that. But we have a very exciting guest for you in this first episode, David Baldacci.
One of the world's best-selling thriller writers.
Yeah, he's sold over 130 million copies of his books, which is quite unbelievable.
That's quite a lot, yeah.
Just a few more than me.
I'm on zero, so he's got 130 million head start.
You'll catch up, I'm sure. And his work's been turned into films. I think his first book, Absolute Power, was immediately turned into a film with Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman.
Pretty much every writer's dream.
So that's not a bad start to your writing career. He's had famous characters such as Amos and most recently Aloysius Archer in his new book, One Good Deed, which we speak to him about on the podcast. David was kind enough to come and speak to us when he was in Edinburgh on a book tour. I think when he came in, he was slightly wondering who the hell these two Muppets were. But
mic'd up and ready to go.
He seemed to enjoy it by the end of the podcast, but we'll let you judge that.
Word of warning. We did record this in a hotel bar in Edinburgh, and at one point some of the hotel guests come in and they're a little bit rowdy and they're a little bit loud.
Some of the loudest people in the world, in fact.
And it was pretty obvious we were recording a podcast because we had microphones on.
But they chose to communicate only by shouting across each other, even though they were sitting across a small table.
But Marco quickly kicked them out.
Yeah, I managed to, but there is a bit of... All of that is to say that there's a little bit of background noise one point towards the end of the podcast, but it doesn't last for long.
Yeah.
So anyway, hope it doesn't ruin your enjoyment of the podcast, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast.
See you later.
You've got a connection to Barga in Italy.
Yes.
My family's from, my dad's family is from Barga as well.
Yeah, my grandfather was born and raised there before he immigrated.
Oh, wow.
So I went there a number of years ago, and they sort of had a David Baldacci day in Barga.
Excellent. I think I actually remember they had like banners up and things like that.
Yeah. A marching band, and it was... My wife was pretty shocked. Let's put it that way.
It's a lovely little place. But
it is, yes. Mm-hmm. It's tucked away right in the mountains there, so it's beautiful.
So I suppose the way we structure this normally is to begin at the beginning, if you like, and how you got into writing to begin with. Was it something that you always wanted to do from when you were a little child?
Yeah, I was a voracious reader, and I think people who read a lot always think about writing something because they enjoy, reading words so much to create your own stories. And I was one of those kids, I grew up in an age where there was no internet, no cell phones. You entertained yourself by using your imagination, going outside and coming up with all these different worlds. And my mom gave me a journal when I was 7 or 8 years old. that I started writing in, and back then it was very rudimentary, obviously, but it allowed me to have a, sort of a place where I could write down things that I was thinking about. And, I started, in my mind, I had no grand plan to be a mystery thriller writer. I just wanted to write stories. And I started writing short stories. Because for me, they were appealing for two reasons. One, they were short, and you could finish something. I mean, for a beginning writer, a 400-page novel is pretty daunting.
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, people who attempt that as their first writing endeavor run out of gas. Mm-hmm. And I've had so many people come to, book signings and events and say, I just tried to write. It was just so overwhelming, 50 pages in, and I couldn't think of where I wanted to go. So a short story allows you to, write 10 pages and be done, but at the same time teaches you everything you need to know to write longer format. Mm-hmm. You need to create a story, have a narrative, a plot, characters, dialogue. And the other thing that's good about short stories, there's no place to hide your weaknesses. Yeah. In a 400-page novel, you can cruise a little bit, fudge a little bit, not bring your best on every page. But in a short story, you don't have that luxury.
And so you started with the short stories. At what stage? I suppose, and you've been a lawyer as well, I think.
Yeah, I went to college. So I wrote short stories when I was in high school, college, law school, sent them out to lots of places. There aren't that many venues for short stories anymore, and certainly not for unknown writers, and had very limited success with that. And to show you how circuitous my writing career was, I had a friend who went out to Los Angeles to break into film as a producer. He came back and brought a script with him. Never seen a movie script before, and read it. I thought it was an interesting way to tell a story that would be started out as writing on a page and then end up as pictures and sound on a wall. Didn't take any courses of screenwriting. I just kind of jumped over both feet and learned my way. And I wrote 4 or 5 screenplays when I was practicing law. Got an agent in LA based on that. I had a script called Reverse Order. It was kind of like, this was early 1991. It was like Die Hard on a plane.
Brilliant.
And but it was actually, Air Force One. Remember Air Force One and all that. So my Die Hard took place at the White House, where terrorists took over the White House. And this is long before the movies.
White House Down.
Olympus. So, and Warner Brothers and Paramount and Universal, they all thought it was a great script, and the way I had gotten people in and what happened while they were there, and getting people in there to try to save the day. And at the end of the day, it didn't sell. One studio passed on it, and it's sort of the herd mentality out there. If one studio passes, all the other studios get nervous, thinking there must be something wrong. Mm-hmm. The thing about Hollywood is nobody ever gets fired in Hollywood for not making a decision. Yeah. They only get fired for making a decision. Turns out to be bad. And so after that, I was like, well, this is, that was really, really disheartening. And then I thought, well, let me try, sort of the Holy Grail, a novel. Mm-hmm. And I worked in Washington, D.C. My office was near the White House. I would pass by it. I would see, I think Bush 41 was president back then, and occasionally see the motorcade, Secret Service agents. And then I thought, what would be interesting for me to write about a novel where I flipped all the stereotypes. I made all the bad guys good guys and the good guys bad guys. So I had a burglar who was my hero, and the Secret Service and the president were villains. And I wanted to see how that played out. And I spent 3 years writing Absolute Power. Yeah. And then that really changed everything.
Did having an agent for the screenplays help in the pitching of that to publishers, or did you have to sort of start from square one again?
I started from square one again. The people I was dealing with in Hollywood really, I didn't, it's not like I didn't respect them, but they weren't in the public square where I needed to be. So after I'd finished writing the novel, I tried to be as clever in finding an agent as I was in writing a novel. And I would always be on the lookout for first-time novels that hit big. And then I would go down to the bookstore and look at the acknowledgement section, because they always thank their agent. And I got a list of probably like 6 agents that way. And that told me a couple of things. One, all these agencies accepted first-time novelists. A lot of them don't. They'll only take writers to cross over in their career. And 2, the agent had enough wherewithal and fuel in the tank to shepherd a first-time novelist through the publishing gauntlet. So I sent the manuscript up with a very, very, very short query letter, because I tried to learn the business. They don't want to read the query letter, they want to read the manuscript. So the query letter was very simple. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This book is about the president, a burglar, a cover-up, and finally the truth comes out. I guarantee if you read the first page, you won't put it down until you read the last one. And I said that last sentence was very sort of strategic, in that one, I figured if I couldn't have confidence in my material, why would they? And two, I knew that half of them would read it just to prove me wrong.
That's a bold line to put in, because often I read stuff saying don't put stuff like that in.
I went for it because I was like, I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And none of these people knew me. But I had worked on that first chapter over and over and over again for years. And I remember Bill Goldman, the screenplay writer, who wrote the script for Absolute Power, and a 2-time Academy Award winner. I mean, the guy's a legend. Has been often quoted as saying the first 100 pages of Absolute Power is the best 100 pages of any thriller ever written, and that's how you hook people. Because if you don't, I know all the slush piles. I know how many submissions agencies get, and they're good people. They're professional. They want to find the next great thing. Absolutely do, but if they're not going to slog through 100 pages, if you don't catch them and hook them and suck them in the first 15 pages, you're just out of luck. It's nothing really. It might be the book's great after that, but it's just about time. They don't have the time.
And opening to that book it's kind of unusual in the way that you kind of show the crime completely, and the whole book's not about trying to uncover what happened, it's about trying to cover up what happened.
That's right.
It's an interesting twist on that.
That's right. It's a cat and mouse, The burglar has what they want, and it shows how they try to get it, and how he tries to stay one step ahead. That opening, the opening chapter where the crime is being plotted, and then he goes out to the house and sees what he sees and then escapes from it. I thought to myself, look, if that doesn't grab you, then I'm in the wrong line of business. I might as well not be a writer, because obviously I have no idea how to tell a story.
And you wrote that while you were a lawyer still.
Yeah, I had a family, and I was married. We had one child at that time. I couldn't take the starving writer route. I had a mortgage and bills and babies, and so my time was I would write any second I could get. I would write usually in the middle of the night, 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. In the morning every day for 7 days a week. Did it for years. And I know that sounds draconian, and the other thing I get at book events, when people come up, they said, if I just could find the time to write, I know I could do it. And I try to be very encouraging. I said, that's fantastic. Thinking in my mind that you're never going to be a writer. Because if you really were meant to be a writer, you would find the time to do it, because it would be such an obsession with you that you could not do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at what stage did you say, right, that's enough law, I can now focus on doing
finally
this?
Through the law way.
Yeah, I stayed on at my law firm for another year because I had no idea if the book was going to be successful. I also knew then that the publisher had taken a big shot. It was a big advance, a lot of publicity. If the book tanked, I was never going to get another deal. That's just the way it's going to work out there. It's much like anything else. If they pay big and you bomb, goodbye. And good luck. So I stayed on. I was right away started writing a second novel, because again, I just wanted to have a career as a writer, and the way you do that is you write and you create content for people. And then it got to the point where I was working 5 days a week as a lawyer, and then 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, and finally I thought at near end of the year, and the book was going to be coming out, and I was going to have to tour and all that I sat down with my wife and said, look, I think I have the wherewithal to build a career as a writer. And I'm going to take the plunge. I can't be a good lawyer and a good writer all at the same time now anymore, because it's not like I was just writing in obscurity now. I was touring. I was going to tour. I had a lot of obligations. So I said, and if it doesn't work out, trust me, I can go back and being a lawyer. So I've got the skills to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's a good fallback position to have. Absolutely, definitely.
And then, and was it a big hit straight away? Did you find that it was easy to switch that?
It was a big hit straight away. Went right top of the bestseller list. Sold. Just publisher extremely. They paid me a lot of money. They made more money off of Absolute Power than I can even say, because it just sold millions and millions and millions of copies. And then when the movie came out, it sold millions and millions more. So,
and that must have been a crazy experience, seeing your first book being turned into this massive film with Eastwood and Hackman. That must have been fantastic.
It was a great experience. It almost never happens that way.
Totally.
All the stars have to be in alignment for that.
Absolutely.
But that was just the moment when everything clicked. But I tell writers coming up that don't get too obsessed about the film or television component, because that's a whole other business. It's a million cooks in the kitchen. You have no control over it. And if you obsess and micromanage, then it's just going to turn out badly, and you're not going to be focused on what's important, which is writing another novel.
Yeah, other writers that we've spoken to have sort of said the same thing, that you have to just hand it over and safe in the knowledge that your book is always there.
It's always there.
To go back to.
The only other thing you can do, and I've done this with the last 3 or 4 film projects that have come to fruition, is that when people come to me, producers, director, whatever, I sit down with them and I just have a very frank conversation. I want to see if their vision for the material aligns with me. And that's the only protection you really have. And most of the time they're honest, because they're putting out there, what they want to make this, how they want to make this movie or this TV series. And I've turned down people whose vision has come out and has not been aligned. And I said, you know what, your idea is great. It just is not where I want to be right now with this. Yeah. And so I walked away from it. And that's worked out better for me. And then once you find the person and you pull the trigger and they start to make it, then you really need to step away. And the litmus test I use has served me well. And every writer I've told this to has said that's some of the most brilliant advice I've ever gotten. Here's the rule. As a writer, you never want to have so much control over a film project such that if it fails, they can blame you.
Yeah,
that's good advice. Absolutely, yeah.
And trust me, they will.
Yeah, so I mean, if you can say, well, the book was a big hit, so if anything went wrong with the film, it was on your side. You're clean. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you've obviously written a huge number. How many is it now that you've written?
Yeah, I think adult thriller novels, 40, and 5 or 6 books for younger readers. Yeah.
And so, do you have quite a disciplined process when you're writing?
Yeah, it's disciplined, but in an atypical way. I don't count words. I don't count pages. I have an office outside the house in Northern Virginia, and I go there. I have a staff of people. I'm a business at this point, and I have people who help me with scheduling and business matters and marketing and social media and all the other stuff that goes into being, a writer at a certain level. So I go there every day when I'm in town, but I write everywhere. I'm writing in the middle of this tour. I write in the back of a car, on a plane, on a train, in a hotel room, by the pool. And I write every day until my tank is empty. So it could be 0 pages, 1 page, 20 pages. And the next day it could be totally different. And I do know, going along, like a book I'm in the last stages of finishing, probably 4 weeks ago, it was a real slog, because I was at the point where I had maybe 50,000 words written, and now I was at a crossroads I had multiple ways the plot could go. And then it was like 3 or 4 weeks of intensely just thinking without writing anything about where do I need to go with this. I have all these options. I have a million different balls in the air. Which is the best one? And that comes from not outlining everything from A to Z. I have a lot of writer friends, John Grisham, I've known John forever, and John outlines everything from page 1 to page into the novel and doesn't write one word until he's done that. And that works for him, obviously. That does not work for me. I've always felt like if I wrote from an outline, it would read to readers like I wrote it from an outline. Everything's a little too neatly packaged together, whereas books should mirror real life, and real life is a little unsettled, a little messy, a little more chaotic than that.
And I mean, I've said this before in the podcast, but part of the pleasure I find in writing is when your characters do something you didn't even expect them to do.
Absolutely.
It's that unpredictability that's part of the enjoyment.
I have a character named Amos Decker. He's my memory man, very quirky, very just, unpredictable in so many ways. And so I couldn't outline the first Decker novel because I hadn't even spent any time with him on the page. And outlines are great, but you don't get a feel for your characters in an outline. You just don't, because that's just bullet points telling you what they're going to do, what they're going to say, the clues and all that other stuff. But to actually have a feel for them on the page, how they interact with people, how they breathe, how they think, how they move, you don't get that until you start writing. So it took me about 100 pages before I actually got to know the groove that Amos Decker was in and how I wanted him to be treated as a character.
Yeah. So do you kind of have an idea? Do you sit down and say, "This, I've got a spark for what I want to do," and you just plop your character in it and then see how he fares?
I've done it both ways. I've done it where the plot has come first, and I've created characters to inhabit that plot. And I've done it where I have a character, and I want to build a plot around them that are sort of intersects neatly with the abilities they have. So some of my standalone books, like The Winner was my third book. I wrote it in, I think it came out in 1998. It's about a villain named Jackson who figures out a way to fix the United States National Lottery, and he does it chemically. Which great thing about chemistry is that if you couple A with B, you get C not 80% of the time, You get it 100% of the time. In fact, there was a lottery scandal a few years after the book came out in Italy where somebody fixed the Italian National Lottery using a method very close to the one I wrote about. And I got grilled about that from the, La Repubblica, which is Rome's largest daily newspaper. I was like, wow. And when they asked for comment, I said, well, my first comment is, that's bad. Very, very bad. I would never encourage anyone to fix the lottery. But my second reaction was, that is like the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. So that was an idea where I want to build a story around somebody who fixes the national lottery, and then makes it sort of a Faustian bargain where they go to somebody, and he would always pick somebody very poor in a hopeless situation, and he would go to them and say, I can make you rich. All you have to do is play the game. Now, it's not legal, but no one ever know except you and me. Do you want to play or not? Yeah. And then I created characters to have that story.
And when you've got sort of different characters that you follow through some of your books, how do you decide, I'm now going to do an Amos Decker story or an Archer story? Or
some of it comes down to just the practicalities of trying to establish a character. So for a while I had the King Maxwell and the Camel Club series, and I wrote, I think, 5 or 6 books with each of that set of characters. And then all of a sudden you come up with an idea for a new character. I had John Puller, who was my military investigator, and then all of a sudden it was like a shiny new toy, and you sort of run off in that direction and immerse yourself in that world. And then it was Will Robie, this professional hitman, again another shiny new toy. So the King of Maxwell and Camel Club, I kind of, not that I'll not ever bring them back again, but they were sort of set aside because I had something else was new and fresh and exciting for me. And I also wanted, if I'm going to establish them as characters, you have to think a little bit about the business and the sales side of this. Is, okay, if I want to make people really love John Puller or Will Robie, then I have to consistently present books with them in there. I can't write a Will Robie and then go back to writing King of Maxwell and Camel Club, and 5 years later I produce another Will Robie. It's just not going to have that connection with people, because they're going to want it. And if they don't get it after a year or two, then they're going to forget about it and move on to something else. So after that, then I had, with the new character of Amos Decker, then that was my shiny new toy for a while, and still is. And then Atlee Pine came along, a female FBI agent, and that was so intriguing to me to write from a female perspective as a lead protagonist. I have lots of females in my books, but never the lead protagonist. And then Aloysius Archer, that book just, that was only intended to be an ebook short story. 60-page short story. I started writing it when I was on tour for Long Road to Mercy. I don't sleep well in hotels, and I get back from touring and media and all that, and I just wanted something to write at night while I was on the road. And I love the 1940s. I love crime noir, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett. But once I really got into the story and immersed myself, the pages flew. I wrote a 420-page book in about 3 months.
Right. Wow.
And it just, I was on fire with it. But that was an anomaly. That was not planned.
Right. Yeah, that's one good deed you're talking about, which is the most recent one. And I've read it, and it's very, very evocative of that time, and also takes you immediately to Chandler, Hammett, that sort of world. It's very good at setting you in that world. And obviously this Archer's a very good lead character who, I suspect, even though it was only a 60-page ebook originally, we might see more of in the future.
Yes, he'll definitely come back. I'm already thinking about the next one. He's a wanderer, so he'll move on to another place. But that allowed me an opportunity to really be more descriptive. I had to be descriptive and set you in the time period. I couldn't make you think you were in 1949. The book was not going to work. And the only way to do that is really to describe that world that is foreign to a lot of people, where there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's no really the modern conveniences that we take for granted. None of that exists. And I have to show people that it was just a different life. But at the same time, create characters that they care about, have a mystery that is befuddling, and then they can try to figure out, and have some action and all that. But basically, for me, it was almost an allegory where here's Archer, he's not even 30 years old, and he's fought in a world war, almost died, went to prison. 2 of the most traumatic things could happen to a person has already happened to him, and he's not even 30 years old. And then he gets out and he has to spend his parole time for 3 years in Pocket City. And Pocket City, for him, was really his purgatory. So you go there and you're going to figure out, are you going to take the right path or the wrong path? And that, for him, was the challenge.
Yeah.
And when you sit down to write these books, and suddenly this book becomes much larger than you thought it was, how many drafts do you do? Do you put a draft on and you think, actually, this is pretty much ready, or do you sometimes spend ages doing tweaks?
Yes, it can really vary. And I will say with the One Good Deed, it was a lot, because again, I had sort of planned out in my head it was going to be a short story. Then when it wasn't and took on a much bigger structure, there was a lot of work that had to go into that to fill that out. And I had to go back and do more research as well, because I had more indicators in that life that I needed to explore. There were going to be more characters. He was going to travel around more, do more things. And so I had to sort of know all the pieces together. And that was a lot more research than I had initially intended. So sometimes it's, I've written books where the drafts, I've lost count of the drafts because there have been so many of them. Others, have come out in first 3 or 4 drafts. And at the end of that, it really is in a pristine condition.
And do you ever get to the stage of starting a draft and just go, this just isn't working, and just set it aside completely?
Absolutely. I've done that. There was a book I wrote years ago called Last Man Standing. It was about an FBI hostage rescue agent in London. And I wrote one of my longest books, 150,000 words. Turned it in March, and my agent and people at the publisher were like, this is not you. This is not how you normally write. The story's not that good. It's not up to the standard that you would expect. And they were right. And it was, I had some extended family members who were having traumatic times, and I was called in to kind of help over a period of months. One, because of my legal background and other things. So I was unfocused. And I remember getting their comments and going, they're right. So I went back to my office, and one day I cut like 140,000 words. Wow. And I had 10,000 words left, and I had to turn the book in. Really, the deadline, if you want to come out in November, I had to get that book in about 2 months. Wow. So in the 6 weeks, I refocused and wrote another 130,000 words. Wow. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that shows you, 1, when you focus, and 2, when you're really up against the deadline, what you can do. But I do not recommend doing that.
No, it doesn't sound good. And do you ever, it sounds silly given that how many books you've written, but do you ever get writer's block or anything like that?
Oh, all the time. Writer's block is, it's sort of a misnomer. Writer's block is just another stage in the creative process. Everybody gets it. And anybody says they don't, they're lying to you. And it's all about, even people who outline, I suspect, will come to a point in the novel where they look at the outline, they look at what they've written, they look at the outline and go, it's not feel right. Yeah. And then what I do is I do a couple of things. Either I'm a big dog person, so I've got a couple of beautiful dogs I love, and I'll go off for a walk with them, or I'll go and take a shower. And I have to tell you, I have solved so many plot problems in the shower. It's extraordinary. It really is. And it's like when the water is on top of you, your mind just goes, and all of a sudden the subconscious is turbocharged, and then out pops the solution. It's happened to me with the book I'm writing right now. It's happened to me like 5 or 6 times during the course of it.
We've chatted to folk who've said the same thing, that often it's when you don't think about it and your mind's on something else, your subconscious works on it and then throws something to the front of your head, and you think that's how I'll solve the problem.
That's right. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
And it's not even an epiphany. It's almost like, because an epiphany is sort of indicates that you had never been thinking about it, just popped up. But an epiphany is kind of like your subconscious has been working mightily away on it. Your conscious mind is not really aware of it, and all of a sudden it just throws it up to your conscious mind and says, "Here you go. I'm going to go take a holiday."
Well, I mean, how did you come up with the starting idea then? Do you, when you think about, okay, I want to do a new book, do you research stuff? Do you read the newspapers? What is it that sparks that initial idea to think this is the new book?
A lot of things will go into that. For the book I'm working on now, it's another Amos Decker. So the location is in a north central state of the United States, a very rugged, unforgiving place. But there's an amazing economic boom happening there, having to do with fossil fuels. And it's turned the fortunes of the state around, and actually is a big part of the reason why the United States is now energy independent from the Middle East. We're actually an oil exporter now. But there were a couple of other intriguing elements in that state that I just read about and didn't read about it together, but I read something over here, and then found something over here that's really intriguing about military installation that I could make a lot more, esoteric than it actually is. Religious organization that was very close by. And then all of a sudden you have those disparate elements, and then you start to think about how could I bring those together into a compelling story, and then put a character like Amos Decker and to drive it forward.
Yeah.
Sometimes people ask me, are you ever going to run out of ideas? And I joke and said, I was born with 42, so I've got one left, and I'm really clinging on to it.
This is the big one.
This is the big one. This is how I'm going to go out. But you need to continually replenish your creative idea tank. And the way you do that is you get up every morning and walk out the door. You read as much as you can read about all sorts of different things. Be curious about life. Watch people when they're walking down the street. See how people interact. Create something memorable out of something that seems very mundane. Mm-hmm. I love walking down the street and just imagining what people are actually doing and what they're actually talking to each other, where a car is heading or why a window is open in the building. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, asking that question, what could that be if I threw in a little bit of fictional pixie dust? It's amazing how your mind can just run. I was on an NPR show. It was a live show, so it was a radio show live. We're walking through the streets of Washington, D.C. with the host. And one of the questions, and we were right across the street from the White House, he said, I've heard that you get your ideas as walking down the street. And I said, yeah, I often does. And it's okay, for our live national audience, do it right now. So
pressure.
Yeah, the pressure. So we were right across the street from the White House, and they had a bunch of people, tourists taking pictures through the wrought iron fence. And that day, for whatever reason, the National Park Service was there replacing a dead tree on the grounds of the front of the White House. So I said, okay, the tourist over there, you see the tourist over there with a hat on taking a picture, and you see the National Park Service guy in the uniform over there. That's not a tourist. He's not really taking a picture. He's signaling to the National Park Service because he's an inside head about an operation they're going to take to do something bad at the White House. And it's been a long-term mission. The mole inside's been there for a while. And this was their communication level. So the host was like, that's not that. and like 2 years later, I actually used that piece in a book that I wrote. It was a Will Robie novel. Because you just never know. It's all about if you're a creative person and your imagination is good, you can look at pretty much anything going on around you and imagine something different. Mm-hmm. If you just put your mind to it.
Yeah.
And what you said you're a voracious reader. Is it only thrillers you read, or do you read across all?
No, I read everything. I love biographies. I love quote unquote literary fiction. When I was in college, one of my favorite writers was John Irving. Wrote everything that John Irving wrote. Big Agatha Christie fan, Conan Doyle fan. So I grew up reading mysteries and thrillers. I remember reading the first Sherlock Holmes, and it was Speckled Band. I had never heard of Sherlock Holmes. Had never heard of Conan Doyle. I was like 11 years old. I read that story and I finished it and I think, wow, I hope he's written something else.
just
Turns out he had.
Yes.
And is there any kind of rules as you write that you like to stick by? Everyone's heard "kill your darlings," etc. Do you kind of abide by these, or do you kind of think they kind of don't really apply all the time?
Yeah, I really think it's situation by situation, and I have killed off some characters that there are no rules, and the only rules are the ones you create as you go along. And would I ever think about killing off Amos Decker? Probably not, but I would never say never. If the situation were right, and it was maybe the last book I wanted to write about him and go out in a spectacular way, maybe so. I do think you have to play fair with the readers, and I foreshadow and have payoffs all the time, but one thing I tell people at my book events and when I go and do speeches and stuff like that, do not skim my books, because every sentence I write has meaning, and so don't, when you come back and you say, how could I have ever figured it out? And I said, you could have, but you skimmed.
Clues are always there.
They're there.
Yeah. Is that because you kind of, once you write it, you go back and you almost work from the end and see you can plant the stuff?
Some of those I plan along the way from start to finish, but then the more you think about things, like in this book now, I have been in the last sort of section of it and figured out some things along the way that now I have gone back and placed foreshadowing in there to make it all work right. And I call it putting a pin in it. I've written books where I've written an ending, knowing it's not going to be the actual ending. So when I send it over, so it's and I put a pen. I call it a pen ending. I'll tell the publisher and the agent. I said this is a pen ending. I'm sort of juggling 4 or 5 right now, and I haven't decided which one I'm going to go with. It's not going to be this one, but I just wanted to get up the bulk of the book to them so they could start looking at it and giving me feedback.
Yeah.
And so you've got your novels. Do you want to go back? Would you ever want to go back to doing screenplays or do you still do that for a bit in the background?
Yeah, I used to write screenplays more regularly than I do now. And then when I went on, it was probably about 10 years ago, I started doing 2 books a year, and that's a pretty full plate. I write my own books. I don't hire anybody to write my books. But I have adapted one of my books for film, Wish You Well, and I wrote the screenplay for that, and we filmed that. I think that was 2012. And working on a film set, I've been on lots of TV and film sets, working on a film set in a very rural part of Virginia. And we had a great cast. Ellen Burstyn, Academy Award winner, and Josh Lucas, and Mackenzie Foy, who was in the Twilight films, and she was in that big Interstellar and all that.
That's right,
she's a beautiful young actress. I love Mackenzie. I still send her fantasy books that I write because she's a big fan of that. But I remember sitting in a farmyard on a wooden table with my laptop with roosters up my ass, rewriting a scene for Ellen Burstyn to deliver. She's in full costume, waiting in front of the camera for this page of dialogue that I am creating right then. You think that when a script is written, you just hand it over and they make it and no changes. That's never how it works. No. Yeah. Changes are gone throughout, and that's why they call them rainbow scripts at the end, because every time you make a change in a script, it has to be on a different color paper so that all the different departments are on the same page. So at the end of the day, when you look at the finished script, that's why they call it a rainbow script. Yeah. And you may know this, they have a very discrete chronology of the colors you have to go through.
Right, okay.
And, it's probably like 30 of them. And, you never want to get to cherry. And I'm like, son of a bitch, we got to cherry. That's great.
Is that something you'd like to do more of them? Because I would have thought adapting your own books and is that quite hard to do because you're so close to the source material?
It's very hard to do, but you have to go in with the right mentality, knowing I got to cut a lot of stuff out. And you got to pare characters down. You have to blend characters, so 3 characters become 1. A lot of the scenes that, for instance, in the book, there was a scene with a bear, and we sat down with the filmmakers and all that, and they were like, we just don't have money in the budget for the bear. I'm sorry. It's a great scene. And I'm like, nope, done. And then while we were filming, we were supposed to be at this courtroom for 2 days filming, and then Hurricane Sandy hit and dumped tons of snow right where we were. And so we lost a day of filming. But this is not like much, but it was a 26-day shoot. 1 day of filming is a lot. Yeah. But we lost that second day at the courthouse. So there was a gap in the storytelling. So I had to go back and rewrite the script, the scenes going forward, to fill in that gap.
Oh, right.
Because it was an operating courthouse, and so we couldn't go back and use it because they had real cases and lawyers and all that there. So you never know what's going to come up. So I would say I'm probably not going to, unless something really hits me and I just feel obsessed to write it, I would probably never write another original screenplay, because you could spend a lot of time out there and chances are almost nothing that anything's going to happen with it. Mm-hmm. And so why waste the time?
Yeah. And I suppose when you do a script, when you're making a film, there's so many components that have to, like, the script and the music and the actors' availabilities, and everything has to click to make it work well. Whereas if you're writing a novel, you're in control of everything. You're
the master and commander. Films are a very collaborative process, and like the Wish You Well was a 26-day shoot. The post-editing was 7 months of post-editing. And now, thank God, it's all, video, it's digital, you don't have to splice film anymore. Yeah. It's done, but the post-editing these days is where, the really, really heavy work comes in. That takes far longer than it does to film.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's largely all the main questions we had for you, but we like to end on sort of 2 different things. One is to ask you just a bit about things like the last book you read. What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read was, actually it was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, which I enjoyed very much, and I think I gave her a blurb on that. She writes very much in the vein of an Agatha Christie, which I enjoy. It's a really funny story. I was on the Today Show, I think it was the Today Show in August August or July for, they wanted my summer reads, favorite summer read, 5 books to read. Mm-hmm. So I put together 5 books and went on. And I was telling this really cool story about, that's what I did. I recommended Ruth's book as one of my 5 summer reads. And I said, she's hailed now as Agatha Christie of her generation. I said, but before Ruth and in between, after Agatha Christie, another British writer, Caroline Graham, who created the Midsummer Murder series, which I love, the books, and, I'm a big John Nettles fan, and Tom Barnaby for me is like God. He is just amazing. I just love that. And as we've been touring through England and stuff, and we go through these villages, and I'm like, oh my God, this is John Nettles right here. There are bodies all over this place. So on the show, I talked about Caroline Graham, and I said I remember an interview with her. She was being interviewed by the BBC, and it looked like in the parlor of her home cottage somewhere, and she was a wonderful older lady, and she very nice and all that. So the presenter said, Miss Graham, do you know that everybody is saying that you are the Agatha Christie of your generation? And so Caroline sort of thought about that for a second, and she goes, well, if that's the case, then I've got a question. And the presenter was like, oh, what's your question? She goes, well, if I'm the Agatha Christie of my generation, I'd like to know where the money's got to. Probably one of the single best lines I've ever heard in an interview.
That is good.
And what was the last film you watched?
The last film that I watched was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, okay. What were your thoughts on it?
I loved it.
Did you? Yeah.
The film was almost, here's my litmus test for films, it was almost 3 hours long. I never once looked at my watch. I did have to go to the bathroom because I had a giant Diet Coke. And it was a scene where Brad Pitt was going out to the Manson Ranch.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I was trying to hold it until he went in, and then he was going to see the Bruce Dern character. Yeah. And I just ran out and did what I needed to do, and then ran back. And then Brad Pitt was coming out of it, and then that's where he beat the guy up and all that.
Of all the scenes to go, that's one of the tensest scenes right in the middle of the film.
One of the tensest scenes. And I'm going to go back. My son hasn't seen it yet. I'm going to take my son to see it. So we're going to go back and see it together. But I'm a Tarantino fan, and some of the best dialogue. If you read the script for Pulp Fiction, you just get blown away just by the dialogue. But I was born in the 60s, so I remember Helter Skelter 1969 really, really well. The whole country was terrified because people thought, Manson tried to make it as a race riot kind of thing, and we were like, although we were all the way across the country in Virginia, people were like, oh my God, what's happening? It's a revolution. And so the ending is what every person who was alive when all that was done to Sharon Tate and the others, this was payback. Yeah.
I thought the exact same thing. I thought the ending was without spoiling it too much for anyone, I thought it was a very interesting way to end it.
It was. It was kind of, flipping off Manson and all of his people.
I think I wanted more of the Manson stuff because there wasn't enough of that kind of.
I know.
Because the scene, as you're saying, when he goes to the mansion bit was so good, and I was like, I would have loved more of that stuff.
I would have too, and Charlie Manson was only in it for basically one scene, maybe 20 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, and anybody who, wasn't alive back then probably not even know who was a creepy little guy that came up to the door. Yeah. And even though Margot Robbie didn't have a whole lot of lines, well, she's so talented. I mean,
she's brilliant.
Just the scene when she's sitting in the movie theater watching herself.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I've gone back because of that film. I had read a lot about Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski and all that, but I went back and read more about her. And she, what makes it even more tragic is she was just, by all accounts, the nicest human being you would ever meet, and the last person, not that you would ever wish this on anyone, the last person something like that should have happened to. So that's why it was so horrific. But I have to say, I think Leonardo DiCaprio is always underrated as an actor. I know he's finally got the one Oscar, but look, he hasn't been nominated for stuff where I thought, he should have been. And there was one, it was the Boston Mobster one where Jack Nicholson. The Departed.
Yeah.
He was the best actor in that entire film. I don't even think he got nominated. Everybody else got nominated except him. So, and Brad Pitt, again, I thought together they were just fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the last film.
Nice.
And we also do a sort of quick fire questions, so it's a one or other, so just whichever one you prefer. A real book or an e-book?
Real book.
TV or cinema?
Cinema.
This is an Italian one. Pasta or pizza?
Oh, pasta.
Clint Eastwood or Gene Hackman?
Clint Eastwood.
That's good. And one more. Would you rather eat in or go out to a restaurant?
Go out to a restaurant.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
That was
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, that's a good chat. David?
It was, yeah. Midsummer Murders, though.
Who knew you were such a fan?
Yeah, big John Nettles fan. I bet John Nettles didn't know that.
No. John Nettles, he'll know now from listening to the
obviously,
podcast.
yeah, because he's one of
Hi,
our
John. How's it going?
biggest listeners. No, really enjoyed that chat with David. And just, I suppose it's amazing how his career just took off with his first book.
It really is that kind of dream that a lot of writers have.
Lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so rare, and I think it's nice to chat to someone who it has happened to, and to see that often it is just luck. So much of it is just the right place, right time, right agent, etc.
Although the way he approached is to get the agent as well, he seemed to break the rules.
Yeah, I know, and that was interesting because that seems to be the number one rule. People say never do this kind of thing, and he just did it.
It worked for him. And then, I suppose you make your own luck in a way, because it's
absolutely
clear from speaking to him that he, works really hard, treats it like a proper job.
Yeah.
Is writing all the time, coming up with his ideas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I think that is it, isn't it? It is all about writing all the time, and it is about doing it as a proper job and not waiting for the inspiration to strike, but just sitting down and putting words on paper.
Mm-hmm. And just interesting as well, his inspiration for getting ideas is just to imagine what people in the street are doing. The story about the White House and the the gardener in the White House.
It's something I've never tried that, but I've heard a few folks say that. Go out and sit on a park bench and just look at people passing or having a conversation and write down what you think they're talking about. And that is how ideas start, random sparks that you combine together. And I should give it a go.
Well, thanks again so much to David for giving his time.
Thank you very much.
On his tour to come and speak to us. We really appreciated that. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. Who have we got on the podcast next week?
Next week we have Craig Robertson, who is a Scottish crime author and is heavily involved in Bloody Scotland, which is a pretty big writing festival in Scotland.
It's a big Scottish crime writing festival. And it was a really good chat we had with Craig, so please do tune in next week as well. He had a lot of helpful tips.
A lot of advice,
for writers. So
really, really
definitely worth tuning in for that one. If you enjoyed the podcast, as always, please do like, share, and subscribe. The subscribing helps us shoot up the rankings on all of these different podcast apps. So we'd really appreciate it if you could do that. And also, of course, it means that you never miss an episode.
Crucial.
As well as being on the podcast apps, I should say, we're also on YouTube now. We've got our own channel, the Page One Podcast channel on YouTube, if you just search for that.
Yep. So please, we've just launched it, so the more subscribers, the better. Please do go and have a look at it.
Yeah, we'd really appreciate that. Thanks, as always, to Simon Stokes for his production assistance.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with us, they can send us an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk or fire us a tweet, which is at right_gear. Yeah, and we'll just leave you now with an advert for Page One, the writer's notebook that we created. It was successfully funded on Kickstarter and is now available to buy on our online store. And we'll see you next week. See you next week. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below. And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available. Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode. See you later.